everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Amarachi Ubani. U.S. President Joe Biden gave his first address to a joint Congress last week, and it was not just Americans listening to the speech, it was viewed all over the world. President Biden talked about plans to provide family and child care welfare packages and took time to address America's foreign policy. We'll be taking a closer look at the speech with national security law and foreign policy expert Joanna LeBlanc. Here are other discussions in diplomatic circles. There were two high-profile visits to Nigeria last week. The one you probably heard about the most was the virtual Africa tour by the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, during which he spoke to President Muhammadu Buhari, who raised the relocation of the U.S. Africa Command, better known as AFRICOM, to Africa. Mr. Blinken did not answer that question, but both to discuss Nigeria's security challenges and regional security issues, the effort against COVID-19, and the effects of climate change in the Chad Basin. And the other visit to Nigeria was that of the UK's Minister for Africa, Mr. James Doddridge, who held high-level discussions with senior members of the government of Nigeria, civil society and business leaders. He was accompanied by the UK Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Girls' Education and Trade Envoy to Nigeria, Helen Grant. Mr. Doddridge met with the Chief of Staff to the President, Ibrahim Gambari, Senate President Ahmed Lawan, Minister of Foreign Affairs Jeffrey Onyema, and the governors of Kaduna and Jigawa states.
Nigeria's Ambassador Ben Okoyeng has arrived in Havana, Cuba, to begin his new assignment as ambassador to Cuba, with concurrent accreditation to Bahamas, Honduras, and Nicaragua. Before the new appointment, Ambassador Okoyeng was Nigeria's Consul General in New York. Prior to that, he had served as the Protocol Liaison Officer and Special Assistant to the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, and was Protocol Liaison Officer to the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria from 2008 to 2010. He had also served as Chief of Protocol in the Bayelsa State Government House from 2005 to 2007 and Head of Protocol to the Deputy Governor from 1999 to 2005. Chairman of the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, Mrs. Abike Dabiri-Erewa, has sent her condolences to the family of Folajimi Olubumi Adewale, the 20-year-old Nigerian who died while trying to save a woman who fell from the London Bridge, describing Folajimi as a hero and a great martyr. Deeply pained by his death, the NIDCOM chairman appealed to the family to be consoled in the fact that he died a fearless hero who will forever be remembered as a martyr. The late Folajimi Olubumi Adewale, known simply as Jimmy, was on his way home from work around midnight of Saturday when he saw a woman fall off the London Bridge. He and another man jumped into the River Thames in a bid to rescue her. The woman and the other man were rescued by the Coast Guard and the Metropolitan Police's Marine Unit, but Jimmy was not found despite an extensive search.
Welcome back. U.S. President Joe Biden proposed a sweeping new $1.8 trillion plan during his first speech to a joint Congress last Wednesday. While Republicans and Democrats agree on very little, he called on them to work on things that they agreed on. Also, once again, President Biden made clear America's foreign policy.
U.S. President Joe Biden arrives at the Capitol to deliver his first speech to Congress, expecting to argue that he has restored faith in democracy 100 days after he came into office. The address was scaled back this year because of the pandemic, with just 200 people, mostly lawmakers, and a handful of representatives of other branches of government and family members attending. The president kicked things off with the economy, saying America is on the move again, riding on the recent success of an American rescue plan. He then went on to propose a sweeping new $1.8 trillion plan, pleading with the Republican lawmakers to work with him on divisive issues and to meet the stiff competition posed by China.
I will not impose any tax increase on people making less than $400,000. But it's time for corporate America and the wealthiest 1% of Americans to just begin to pay their fair share. Just their fair share.
He also called on Congress to enact police reform in the name of George Floyd, the black man murdered by Derek Chauvin, the police officer, on the anniversary of his death on May 25th.
We have to come together to heal the soul of this nation. It was nearly a year ago before her father's funeral when I spoke with Gianna Floyd, George Floyd's young daughter. She's a little tyke, so I was kneeling down to talk to her so I could look her in the eye. She looked at me, she said, "My daddy changed the world." Well, after the conviction of George Floyd's murderer, we can see how right she was if we have the courage to act as a Congress. We've all seen the knee of injustice on the neck of black Americans. Now's our opportunity to make some real progress. The vast majority of men and women wearing a uniform and a badge serve our communities, and they serve them honorably. I know them.
President Biden praised his administration's handling of the coronavirus pandemic, saying having promised to get 100 million COVID-19 vaccine shots into people's arms in 100 days, they would have provided over 220 million COVID shots in those 100 days.
We've talked about it long enough.
On foreign policy, the president reiterates that he welcomed competition from China, but that he has told the Chinese president that he will defend America's interests across the board. Also, that while he had taken action against Russia for interfering in America's elections and cyber attacks, there were opportunities to cooperate with President Putin on other issues.
We can't be so busy competing with one another that we forget the competition that we have with the rest of the world to win the 21st century. With regard to Russia, I know it concerns some of you, but I made very clear to Putin that we're not going to seek escalation, but their actions will have consequences. They turn out to be true, and they turned out to be true. So I responded directly and proportionally to Russia's interference in our elections and the cyber attacks on our government and our business. They did both of these things, and I told them we would respond, and we have. But we can also cooperate when it's our mutual interest.
As per usual, when American presidents addressed Congress, there was a rebuttal from the opposing party. In this case, Republican Tim Scott of South Carolina, while commending the president's speech, took a swipe at what he calls the White House misstatements.
The president absurdly claims that this is worse than Jim Crow.
President Biden's appearance in Congress broke a historic glass ceiling, as two women, Vice President Kamala Harris and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, sat behind the president for the first time in U.S. history. It carries a symbolic meaning for the advancement of U.S. women in recent decades, since Harris and Pelosi stand first and second in the presidential line of succession, respectively.
Let's talk now to national security, law, and foreign policy expert Joanna LeBlanc. She joins us from Washington. Joanna, thank you for joining us on Diplomatic Channel.
Thank you for having me, Amarachi. It's always an honor.
It's always great to have you. So let's begin with my first observation of U.S. President Joe Biden's speech in Congress. Again, nothing on Africa, despite the security challenges here. But it's not the first time I've made this observation, even during the campaigns. I know we did talk about it, whether Africa is a priority for the U.S. government, number one, and then if this could have anything to do with Secretary of State Antony Blinken's virtual visits to Africa. Probably he felt, President Biden felt or feels that the Secretary of State handled that part, and he really didn't need to hop any further on it.
First and foremost, I don't think the lack of mention of Africa or the Caribbean countries is a representation of the administration's lack of interest as it relates to those regions. Here's why. The State of the Union address before Congress is a time for the president to discuss what has been accomplished within the 100 days on behalf of the American people. We have to take into account that President Biden was elected by the American people, not not Africans in Africa, not people from the Caribbean, but the American people. So President Biden has an obligation during his address before Congress to discuss what has been done to alleviate the lives of Americans in this country, to what has been done in terms of fighting this global health crisis here at home. And also, what about employment? What does that look? What does the economy look like for the American people? So again, President Biden has an obligation to the people of America. But also, we must consider the average American knows nothing about foreign policy. They are far removed from what is happening throughout the rest of the world. So an address that focuses on foreign policy would not appeal to the mainstream Americans, one, and two, it would not help Biden to get votes in 2024, which I'm sure he is going to run he's going to run again for the presidency. And even if he does not, the Democratic Party still needs to establish a good basis, a good record, so the American people could elect another Democrat after Biden's term ends. So no, I don't think it's a representation of the lack of interest on the African continent.
If we could stay with talk on Antony Blinken, whom you did not mention, but I did mention about his virtual visit to Africa. When he was speaking with Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari, the presidents did bring up the issue of relocation of the African Command to Africa, AFRICOM. Now, I have two questions on this. First of all, the possibility of the relocation of AFRICOM to any country in Africa, which of the countries would likely be the candidates? Which countries would be likely candidates for that? And second, can AFRICOM exist side by side with, the Chinese Command and the French Command, which already have bases on the continent?
I think logistically and cost-wise, it's impossible. It's probably not going to happen. And I also think in terms of security reasons, it's not going to happen either. But I can see why an African government would want AFRICOM to be headquartered in Africa, right? There are a number of reasons. One, the jobs that it would bring to the country or the continent in general, because you have to house roughly 3,000 military personnel, right? You have to house the personnel, their families. You have to provide them with housing and a host of other resources to ensure that the headquarters could function accordingly and appropriately. So again, I can see why, from an economic perspective, why an African government would want it headquartered in Africa. But we also have to keep in mind that with France having bases across the Francophone countries, we have not really seen a decrease in insurgency. We have not seen a decrease in what some will call terrorist acts in that region. So one could only wonder, would bringing America's headquarters to Africa, military headquarters to Africa, really help address some of the insurgency and security challenges impacting the continent? And third, I think that it speaks volume to the President Buhari essentially asking for external assistance to address challenges impacting Africa and Africans. We often say that to truly address issues impacting Africa, you need African solutions.
And our conversation with Joanna LeBlanc continues in a moment. Join us again. You must have heard, news about what's currently going on in Nigeria. Insurgency is on the rise. There are pockets of banditry and kidnappings happening across the country. And I'm sure it is probably one of the reasons why President Buhari is talking about the relocation of AFRICOM. Some security experts, some people have said that we need to invite foreign powers to help with Nigeria's insecurity issues. What are your thoughts on that?
I think obviously there is room for technical assistance. There is room for additional training of Nigeria's military personnel. There is room to provide Nigeria's military with more foreign assistance to ensure that it has the capacity to address some of the dire challenges impacting Nigeria. However, we must not forget that there's an embargo, an arms embargo that has been imposed against Nigeria. So I think that President Buhari should have also taken the opportunity to ask the United States government to lift the arms embargo so that Nigeria could purchase weapons in other countries such as the United States. But another point that I would like to make is that the challenges, the security challenges impacting Nigeria, especially when you look at Boko Haram. Boko Haram does not exist in Lagos, right? It does not exist in Abuja. Boko Haram exists in the northern region of Nigeria, which has been historically neglected by the government. So we know what drives Boko Haram to Nigeria. It's an easy fix. Provide resources to the people in that region, right? And then there will be it will be less appealing for a person to join Boko Haram, because this is what's happening, right? Boko Haram is coming to young people with no means, saying that, hey, I have an opportunity for you to make some money, to belong to a society, to have support. Well, the government does not provide those opportunities to the region. The region has been highly neglected. I think the executive branch, as well as the National Assembly in Nigeria, needs to create a better plan to address the economic challenges impacting the region. And if you do that, there will be less presence of Boko Haram. And I won't say that Boko Haram will completely disappear, but there will be less presence of Boko Haram. And second, people will less likely want to join because they have options, they have opportunities to pursue life, liberty, and happiness.
And now to President Joe Biden's speech. It came on the eve of his 100 days in office. And when you compare President Biden's 100 days with his predecessor, Donald Trump, are there any differences?
Well, one thing that I think that we need to keep in mind is that regardless of who is the president of America, whether you are a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent, the interest of America and the American people will always come first. Always. So in Biden's speech, some have argued that they did not see much of a difference between President Trump's priorities versus his priorities. And here's the reason why. Again, it's because of the national security interest of the country must always be first priority. We saw how President Biden talked about the trade war between China and the United States, right? We saw how he has, in essence, laid out a plan on how America will win this fight. And furthermore, the difference between Biden and President Donald Trump in terms of this trade war with China is Biden understands the importance of multilateralism, the importance of working with other member states, with other nations to fight this war. Whereas President Trump essentially went solo. He went after China by himself. So again, I think that there is a slight difference in terms of the approach on how to ensure that America's interests are protected, but ultimately it's the same.
Yeah, and I agree with you. The language is slightly different, but the message is the same. President Biden, during his speech, talked about advancing proposals to investments he said would benefit the middle class. He wants to make sure that every nation plays by the same rules in the global economy. And then he mentioned unfair practices that undercut American workers and industries, basically what President Trump also fought for. And then he talked about working with Russia on mutual interests. The only difference, of course, is him not going after Russia as hard as, well, talking about Russia, there is a slight difference there, isn't there? Because President Trump refused to acknowledge Russia's interference in America's elections, but Joe Biden has acknowledged them and even taken a swipe at Russia for that, imposing sanctions and even affecting diplomats in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what African governments shall take from this state of the address before Congress is, in the midst of America's weaknesses, right, in the midst of America's wars with other nations, there is an opportunity for African governments to lobby, to capitalize off of that, because countries are driven by interest, right? So if the African governments understand the challenges that exist between the United States, Russia, United States and China, United States and other nations, African governments must leverage that and position themselves as the viable option to addressing some of those challenges that will serve not only in the best interest of America, but also in the best interest of African economies. And what I would have liked to hear, and this is just a wish, because I know the state of address was not a place to discuss foreign policy per se, but I would have liked to hear more on trade policies moving forward. We know we have AGOA. We know we have Prosper Africa, which was created under the Trump administration. I would have liked to hear, what is the administration's position on Prosper Africa? Is it an initiative that the administration is going to continue? Because I think, regardless of your position when it comes to former President Trump, I think Prosper Africa was an initiative created to make it easier for American businesses to do business abroad. And I think that African countries could have leverage on that, could have increased their capital, increase their respective GDP per capita. Because the reality is, by 2025, Africa would have the youngest working population in the world. That is significant. And by 2035, Africa's spending power will be in the trillions. So African governments must must be positioned accordingly to ensure that policies, whether it's economic policies or human rights policies or governance policies, serve in the interest of its people, that will create avenues to increase Africa's GDP per capita as it relates to specific countries across the continent.
We'll have to leave you there. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure really speaking with you on Diplomatic Channel, and thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Amarachi. I appreciate it.
We've come to the end of the program. Don't forget, you can watch previous editions of Diplomatic Channel. Head on to programs on the channel's TV website and click on Diplomatic Channel. I'm Amarachi Ubani. You can reach me using any of the social media handles showing on your screen.